Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mephisto and welcome to the ride. We're here today in Toronto and the guest I'm getting today is an old school DJ here in the city. She's also an hardcore vinyl collector and an indigenous environmental activist. And I can't wait for you to discover her. Let's go. Ariel.
Hey, how are you?
Alright. Let's go on a ride.
Where are we gonna go?
Okay, so just give me a quick intro for people who don't know you.
Yeah. I'm DJ Ariel. I am indigenous to Turtle Island. I grew up in Coast Salish territory in the Okanagan, and I've been in Toronto for the past 10 years. Wow, how did I get started though? I got started because I actually was dancing when I was young. I started when I was about 6, and by the time I was in high school, I really just couldn't find the music that I wanted to play, and I started collecting vinyl. And it got to the point where I had so many records that I felt like I needed to do something with them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the very Coles Notes version of how I got started.
So yeah, we actually met around like not too far after you moved here, basically, because I moved here like almost 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And we did a gig together actually at Cold Tea.
Yes.
That's fun times with Jojo.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Jojo Zolina.
Jojo, what up?
Yeah, and all right, so let's take a step back. You said you were dancing before?
I was, yeah.
What kind of dance?
Classically trained. I started in ballet, and my parents didn't really see eye to eye on that route.
Mm-hmm.
So I wound up having to kind of teach myself a lot of the things that I was really interested in. And so by the time that I was in high school, I was like doing summer school classes with kids. I was teaching hip hop to like grade school, and then I started doing some work with Harbor Dance Center,
Okay.
and wound up being able to kind of fulfill a lot of my, I guess like abilities, capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in exchange for classes, so that I was able to continue on, and then went on to school, and so trained in almost everything. Not jazz, but yeah, ballet, contemporary, hip hop, belly dance, dance hall.
Cool. And
Yeah.
who were your teachers?
So there's tons. Wow.
For hip hop?
For hip hop, was in the early days. It would have been Harge, Richard O'Sullivan, Krish. This was like before it was cool, right? So it was like not even easy to find folks. I was actually B-girling right before I was DJing with this dude named Casper, who I met through Prevail Wonder from Swollen Members. And so it was like a small community, and you just kind of got it in where you could.
Yeah.
But Harbor was kind of my go-to. I also trained with Lisa Stevens for a long time. She made her way up to like London and Broadway. She did Chicago for a while. Folks like that. And then, once it kind of became bigger, all of the guest teachers that came through. Shout out to Lenny Len.
Oh, yeah.
Some of my favorites. JoJo, obviously. Eric Malapad. Yeah.
think only name you mentioned, because I'm not from the city, so I don't know a lot of dancers here.
And those are mainly Vancouver, actually.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so you moved to Canada, to Toronto 10 years ago, but so where's Turtle Island?
So Turtle Island is what mainly Indigenous people call North America.
Oh, I see.
Right, so just kind of going back to using the original terms and names of places to increase our visibility, and it's kind of more of a direct statement on the erasure of our peoples, right? So
I see. See, I'm learning something already.
Not a lot of people know that, I guess.
Well, it's a good opportunity to know. So you were before Toronto, where were you?
I was in Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So a decade here.
So that's where you met Jojo in Vancouver.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, through dance. Yeah.
Right. So you did hip hop with him or whacking or?
I did hip hop, whacking, dance hall.
Right. Okay. Now it all makes sense.
I even guest taught one of his whacking classes.
Really?
Yeah.
And you
Those
still
are
dance today?
Big shoes to fill, though.
I know. And you still dance today?
I don't as much. I'm gonna be really real about that. I had a really tight-knit community at West, and it really allowed for me to be able to do what I needed or what I wanted within that industry without a lot of money.
Right.
It's really expensive to be a dancer.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
To keep up with the classes, to keep up with your body work, to make sure that you're tuned properly, going to the chiropractor or whatever you do. It's like you could run yourself a couple $1,000 a month easily.
Yeah.
But even modestly, a few $100 a month can be a lot at times when you live in a huge city. So.
I was talking to some dancers in Montreal that are really trying to push having free places to go practice, because they're saying it's ridiculous. If you want to practice basketball, you don't have to pay for the field.
Yeah.
You have those places when you can go and practice, and for dance it should be the same. And unfortunately now every time you want to practice, you need to book a studio, pay for that.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, there's places like Ryerson where a lot of dancers are training there for free. They're doing events.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I never really connected to the scene here because I wasn't really able to. So, I kind of hit the ground running when I moved here, and music definitely was a part of that. But 2008, I moved up during the recession.
Oh, yeah, right.
Best timing ever.
Nice. So 2008, 9?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your music journey, you said you accumulated a lot of vinyls, but how did you start? You started vinyl right away, or? Well, I guess so.
Yeah, I did, because, I was just buying to listen. And once the collection became big enough, one of my first gigs, I wound up buying a lot of, not to separate, this is not the goal here in the way I'm speaking about this, but I was buying a lot of female hip hop. I kept coming across names I'd never seen of or heard of, and I was traveling a little bit, so when I'd go to New York or Cali or places like that, I'd come across all these names. Who is, Missy Mist and I think it's the Melody Crew, and all of these kinds of names that are just super wild. So I collected them all, and my first gig was actually in Seattle at a party called Invasion of the Beat Girls.
All right. So you had the right music for this.
So yeah, I did. Yeah. People like to spread this rumor around that's kind of fun, which I don't know if is actually accurate at all. I'm sure there are a lot of DJs out there that have a large so-called female rap collection. Sorry, it's cringy, I'm sorry. But a lot of folks say that I have the largest, because I have thousands of records, so
oh, really?
It is possible that I have the most female records that I have in terms of rap.
That's rap is your go-to.
That's what I started with.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely not my go-to. It's hard to describe how I play music. You know, the night that we played together was definitely like a theme, so that, you know, it was more like hip-hop, R&B. But when I get to play, you know, things like art galleries and places that people aren't necessarily there to like dance or party, then I have the ability to flip through genres, and then that could look like a lot of different things. The past few years I've been collecting a lot of jazz, and jazz and like instrumental beat music, like beat scene stuff, to me goes together beautifully. And I'll always be an R&B fan, you know, of all decades and eras. And naturally, like, hip-hop fits into that puzzle as well. But then also, getting more versed into vinyl, I've been able to slowly start picking up on pieces of that I like, that I would never really necessarily come across without digging. So, like, random psych rock records, or like folk records. It doesn't sound like they would all mix together, but somehow I make it work.
And
it's pretty fun.
Well, you're talking about how expensive it is to be a dancer, but if you collect vinyls, being a DJ is also expensive.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
How do you store all that? Like, how does it look when you move?
Don't move.
Don't move. So do you store this all at, at your place? So you have like a storage room? Like, if you have thousands of them, like...
Yeah, I probably have about 5,000.
5,000?
Yeah. And they're all in my living room.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Must be hard on the floor.
Maybe. It's possible. My building's really old too, so I wonder.
Do you have like vinyls covering your bed and you sleep on the side?
I'm hella organized.
Yeah. I see.
I don't mess around. But yeah, they'll have, you know.
Yeah, so you must be really organized with your vinyls. Like even if you want to find something for gigs, and you bring vinyls to all your gigs, or you
not all. No, not all. It depends on like kind of what I'm going for or who's there. You know, like in the fall, I'm doing the Unity Festival. They want me to do the silent disco, and I'm like, for an hour set, that's kind of the gem. You know, those are the places that I would be bringing all of my vinyl to, because you don't have to bring tons of it. You don't need crate boys to help you out. And yeah, so those are the kinds of places that I like to bring my vinyl to, because it's kind of quick, it's easy, and then it gives me a wider range in some ways. Mainly probably because I'm a bit of an audiophile. Like, I really like lossless. MP3s are really hard for me, hard for my ears, and not a lot of people notice that, but I do. I care about it, so yeah.
That's pretty cool. And so, but you did the jump to the all digital, world.
I did. I kind of got suckered in when everyone started getting rid of their vinyl, because at the time I was working at a record store in Van City called Beat Street.
Okay.
And people were offering their collections, and I was like a kid in a candy store. Every single paycheck, and then some, was going to buy vinyl. But it was a really great time to do that, because you could find almost everything. And also because I was getting, I was thickening up my collection quite a bit at that point. I also didn't really want to be bringing it out all the time. So I jumped to Serato. But I was late in the game for that. I was resistant. I was so resistant. I was like, you guys are cheating.
Yeah.
Trying to play the purist card. I don't know why. But yeah. It definitely is super fun playing with Serato too, because you get to instead of being very specific when I bring vinyl out, kind of picking a genre or two or three, you get to be kind of wild Serato, and a lot of the times I'll be playing, a Manifesto festival or something like that, and people will come up to me, hey, I tried to sorry,
Shazam.
coffee, Shazam you. I get stuttery when I drink coffee sometimes. I tried to Shazam you, and I couldn't figure out what you were playing. Can you tell me like the third last song you were? I'm like, well, partly maybe it's because my music isn't necessarily well known, but the other thing is you get to layer so many different tracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you are creating your own thing, and it isn't, definable. Shazamable. And I can say that properly now that I got the tongue out of the way. Yeah. So I think I like the way that you're able to do a lot of things moving into a digital platform, but in my heart of hearts, it's always going to be turntables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in terms of music, have you also jumped into the world of like more organizing events, or you always been like a book DJ?
Well, interesting question. When I was a teenager, I promoted a couple of my own parties. And my mother is a queen. I feel so bad that, I couldn't break even. But she did help me out a couple of times with those parties. And so, yeah, I was booking DJs and throwing a couple like low-key events, but I guess I learned early on that you need to have enough money to make back the money.
Yeah.
B, have an incredibly large network that is able to actually pay your door fee. It's not like we would ever even really do a lot, $5-10, but those kinds of things get in the way if you're not like super networked up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really risky. It takes a lot. I think a lot of people really need to be focused full time in that regard. So
yeah.
No, I don't like throwing parties. I'm not into organizing. I like to show up and do what I do, and that's it.
Yeah, it's pretty draining.
Yeah.
It's a pretty draining gig.
Especially because I have so many other things going on too, right?
Right.
If it was kind of my only gig, then I would imagine I'd probably be, in that realm. For me, it's just not possible. I don't really have the time.
And so, yeah, like, did you like with the switch to the all like digital world, like, I mean, you still need to like promote and get known as a DJ if you want to,
Yeah.
But since you've been around for 10 years, I'm pretty sure you have your network. But
Yeah.
how do you promote yourself nowadays with, with the old ways and the new ways? What's your go-to way to network to promote?
Yeah. I'm one of those weirdos who doesn't like to do any of those things. And perhaps I just have like some loyalty and some people that are really, interested in the same kind of music that I am into.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm really resistant to the internet in some ways. And I think that it can be a beautiful thing, but like I kind of have a political background in some regard. I'm not all the way deep into that work as a lot of my people are, but I help organize that work.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I kind of get resistant because of the culture around it,
Mm-hmm.
but also because of the supply chain around it, right? Toronto right now is trying to get this proposal through for their smart city,
Right.
and I think things like that are interesting, but I also think, for me personally, that they're morally playing this line, stepping over the line, because we don't have the ability to like actually feed and clothe, and like people are hungry. They're they don't have the basic needs. Our smartphones, the way that we're recording this, like all things, like this impacts a lot of people, and just because they're not in our backyard doesn't mean that it's not happening. And so I think like that is part of the reason why I have a bit of resistance towards it, because I don't think that it's ethical the way that it's produced. And so that gets in the way for me. I definitely resist it because of that. But then also the culture, right, it can be kind of really heavy around like ego and around
right.
Playing on people's insecurities and that type of thing. And so I'm bad at it. I'm really bad. I'm trying to make an earnest effort to be like a little bit more present online, because it's like, yeah, I'm here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm an Instagram message away. I'm on Twitter. I'm not really on Facebook. That's probably as far as I dabble. For me, it's mainly word of mouth, I suppose. I'll do an old school, like, call people up. I'll text a few people. That's how I get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
Most often, I actually don't. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in a way, like you talked about all those, like all the side that is not ethical with respect to internet, but in another way, it's also a way for people to know a lot of things that they were not able to know before too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of how I politicize myself. I learn a lot from being on the internet.
Yeah.
And I dig that, but it's like a mental block.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm there, I'm participating in it. Does that mean that I'm accepting it? You know, like...
Well, just the fact that you're on Twitter and not on Facebook says a little bit too. Like I find most people like today that are actually on Twitter and active have more shit to talk about. You know?
Maybe,
like a lot of stuff happen on Twitter, but if you have things to say, a lot of people have things to show, little to say.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know, that's my personal observation.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, you might be right.
Yeah, like all the biggest thinker nowadays, they just use heavily Twitter, and they're trying to stay away from it. So sometimes because there's a lot of backfire that comes with Twitter when you reach a certain network, I guess.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. I'm in tech. I'm a software engineer, so I'm a little biased on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like every tool, right? There's good and bad sides.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so you were talking about your the organization you work for about a year and a half.
Yeah. Indigenous Climate Action.
That.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, so like the way that I balance my life is like I do my art. I DJ. I don't professionally dance anymore, but that's still part of my life. And I do like dabble in other pieces of art in different mediums. But yeah, I've always felt like I can't have that life without having an anchor of like working towards something positive. And I just happen to be blessed enough to work with Indigenous Climate Action. It's a fairly new organization. They haven't gone through a colonial process of incorporating, so we're actually a project of the Polaris Institute. But we were founded in 2015 by mainly women in Alberta who were facing major infrastructure and industry around the tar sands. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And, my nation, we're based in Alberta and Montana. So, this is something that is definitely very close to my heart. This is my work. This is what I do. And so now I have the ability to work with a huge network and team of people who are, like on that side of the compass that allows for people to be moving forward in a different direction. And I'm not gonna like put a blame game or criticize or point fingers or do any of those things. But at this point in time in our world, we really need to be a lot more thoughtful about our future. And so we have a few different scopes of work. Currently, we are building what we're calling an Indigenous Worldview Climate Change Toolkit. And so what this will do is it will train up community members, different territories, nations, reservations, whatever it might be, to kind of do a little bit more of a critique or an analysis of their current climate situation. Some nations and peoples might have already, this work undergo, but so many also don't. And then it therefore will allow to kind of reflect on how Western science and Indigenous knowledge kind of pushes this narrative of like solutions, right? And I mean, let's kind of be real that Indigenous people know this land from time immemorial, and there is a real gap, in my opinion, when it comes to Western science in these lands and territories on Turtle Island, because they just haven't been here for as long. And again, it's not a criticism, it's just who knows that history, who knows that land. And so Indigenous peoples really have an important place in creating solutions and sharing what works in their areas towards building a safer climate future, right? So there's a lot of different avenues. We're really working with young people. We're working with like international bodies, and just people that are on the front line, people that are doing the work, people who are really sacrificing their lives, right, to make sure that things are done safely, which is really immensely hard when you have a government that's a corporation.
Yeah. So hold on, step back a second. This toolkit you talked about, what's the goal? Is it like it's more like an information tool to take action with respect to what to do on your day-to-day basis with regard to climate? Like
yeah. So I mean, it could look like so many different things, right? So say you have a nation, I'll give an example, Eagle Lake First Nation. They are a smaller northern community. They're just outside of Dryden, Ontario, and they already have a climate department. So this toolkit may not necessarily be for them to kind of understand their positionality and where they're at. It would be more so to say, oh hey, we're looking at geothermal, and geothermal might be a little bit problematic in some ways because our ground is frozen for a lot longer than other places. So what other kinds of ideas can we utilize, or what other kind of tools or technologies can we utilize? Again, going into this kind of ethical place, I mean, we've got to be careful about a lot of these things. We can't just like keep mining for all of the tools that we need for solar panels and things like that. It really needs to be a diverse kind of like solutions oriented like infrastructure. So like, would it be wind, would it be sun, would it be algae, like all of these different things that can help us with our energy problems, and just kind of creating also literacy around a lot of these ideas. A lot of people don't know that you can build like a battery pack that is fueled by algae, right? And you can,
algae?
Yeah, and you can just
what's the algae? Sorry.
So like algae from the ocean or from the lakes.
Okay.
It's actually one of the oldest like organisms in the world. There's actually less in common between a red algae and a green algae than it would be between like me and a dolphin. They're very, very diverse and complex system.
Oh, okay.
And
Sorry,
so, like,
I just don't know the word in English. It's okay,
yeah.
I just got the.
It's all good. yeah, it's all good. So, like, and now because of climate change, our oceans are warming and becoming more acidic, and algae blooms are quite heavy. But that actually can also be utilized in different ways, right? So you can build solar packs with algae. You can actually use algae for beauty products, as opposed to animal products. It's like there's a lot of different things that you can utilize and kind of push forward. And so this toolkit is primarily made so that people can do this analysis, understand needs of their own communities, and then take action. But not only that, they'd also be able to have the tools to be able to kind of like push that information farther along as well. So they could do these trainings in other communities. They could say, hey, we use this toolkit in our community, and this is what it looked like. And then that then can in turn create more nation-to-nation building and more kind of networking and building up with different communities and nations, peoples that have maybe similar ideas or have the ability to work together on different projects. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding, this toolkit is really targeted to nations. Is there, like, if you have this type of knowledge, is there an interest to basically share it to everyone?
It will be publicly available. It will be on our website, and so it will be available to everyone. But because our peoples don't have as many resources and don't have the same type of access to these resources, we've targeted it to Indigenous people in Turtle Island, specifically north of the Medicine Line, which is so-called Canada, because we recognize the supports need to be there. More
Right.
capacity needs to be there. And so our choice is to support our peoples. Not to say that it can't be utilized by other people. I'm sure that you could take a look at it, from another community and see ways that it could fit your own work or your own kind of ideas of building into the future. And that's part of it, is that it's made open-endedly so that it can be tailored, right? Yeah, it'll be really interesting when it comes out by the end of this year, or probably by the end of this year, what the feedback will be like, and to hear how people are utilizing it.
So I do follow a lot of environmental news. I'm really interested by that for a lot of time. But the thing I just realizing this, the thing I never hear about in all this content I'm following is this type of point of view.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and like, it's a little odd. That's why I'm asking this question. Like,
Yeah. The thing is like, when you look at the history of environmentalism, it mainly came out of the United States. And it was a huge divide between communities of color and white people, right? So white folks kind of made this environmentalist movement a thing, but did not reflect on other communities. When those communities, especially black and brown people in the States, they were faced with, landfills, they were faced with mining, all of these types of things, whereas they were organizing in their own ways, but white environmentalists didn't, they kind of kept it segregated. And so that's the history of the environmental movement, is like they very, very much stood on their own, in their own silo. And so that it's not surprising when you hear the narratives now in mainstream that it still echoes that same positionality, right?
well, I guess also the one of the reason is that the motivation behind a lot of the environmental actions are driven by markets, which is different from indigenous communities, which is more just ingrained in the culture, right? There's different motivation. What was I gonna say? Yeah, you said that the environmental movement started in the state, but I mean, in Europe back in the 70s, we had an 70s or 60s, and the end of the 60s.
Mhm.
We had a huge movement that was started by the students who they were basically the generation after the Second World War.
Yeah.
And it was how can I say this? I don't want to also like give like bad information because my memory is a little weird, but basically the generation after the war, where like they had parents that did the war, and they were basically like bored, and they were like, how can I explain this? It was the beginning of all the university basically,
Okay.
and where like the teenage time was kind of created, because before the war, you were just like a kid, and then you became a man. You went to
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah.
And after the war, the whole industrialization that was triggered by this era, people needed to be more educated.
Mhm.
So more people went to university, and you had this gap. Now you were not really a kid, but you were not really an adult. So the teenage time just I want to say was created, because it's a creation. There's no teenager
was.
doesn't exist.
No, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
Because after the wars, well, I mean, the byproduct of like oil, and the reasons why like people are digging for oil for fuel, a lot of the reasons why why it is still a big deal is because it's also used for plastic.
Yeah.
Right? And so like after the wars, it became such a consumerist product. And kind of like you were saying about the environmental movement, which I loved that framing, it's actually really perfect. It is about markets, and that is exactly when the whole like individualism phase of the American population really came to be, because Sigmund Freud's daughter Anna Freud moved to America to actually work with corporations, and looking at like manipulation tactics around purchasing power.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was kind of segregating people in terms of their age, right? So what you're saying, that like creating this kind of era where teenagers were actually a thing, comes out of consumerist culture, because the way that they targeted the individualist kind of thinking was through a female independence. So consumerism became a really big deal when women were independent enough to smoke.
Okay.
Right? And so that was the biggest kind of major marketing scheme that the American public put on their people. And then that in turn kind of created this individualistic way of thinking even within families, because then mothers were independent, so were their children. Their children were independent. And then through that, their children also had purchasing power. And things were slowly becoming more popular in terms of marketing to children,
Yeah.
and to kids.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where all of that comes from.
Yeah, as far as I remember, advertising always been targeting kids,
Mhm.
especially with like McDonald's and all that stuff. Yeah.
Totally. And that's, like anybody who's studied marketing knows that that's kind of where you loop them in young, and in those eras it was the kids begging their parents to buy them the things. And now you don't have to do that as much, because it's already ingrained generationally. People are used to spending money, and it's not kind of a question of whether you're going to buy it, it's just how much are you going to buy.
How much you're ready to spend on something. So in terms of to go back on my late 60s story, we had this huge student movement that were basically going against the patriarchal figure that was the president at the time, Charles de Gaulle. And like the consequence of this is a lot of different talks started popping up, like feminism, environmentalism, and so this movement also came out of like multiple other countries. That's why I was surprised when you said that it started in the US. It's funny because a lot of those different like branching in terms of thinking came out around the same time, late 60s, 70s, even like the sexual revolution. coming out from the state, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like the old Kinsey Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
No? Look it up. It's pretty interesting.
What's that?
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. Like the old sexual revolution that happened in the 70s. Actually, it's post-war. If you look it up, it's pretty dark. Yeah.
I believe it. I don't think humans really have quite reached their sexual freedom yet.
It's just pretty dark because this study so this guy called Kinsey from the US was a professor it was a biology professor who started this sexual investigation on male sexuality. Okay. First, he wrote 2 books, one about male sexuality and one about female. And the fucked up thing is that the study was done basically during the war, and the male he studied a lot of them were prisoners. Okay. Yeah, a lot of them were prisoners. Yeah, I don't want to say too much. There's a lot to say about this, and I don't want to throw like bad information. Okay. But it's a really interesting topic to look into.
I will.
So you know what? It's really interesting for me to talk about this with you because I mean, like I'm not a citizen in this country yet, but I've been meaning when I become a citizen, I want to get more involved into actual environmental actions, maybe politics. We'll see. But yeah, it's just really interesting to talk about those things. Like I don't know a lot of people who talk about environment in this country so far. Way less than my country.
Wow.
We're really political in France. Yeah. Very, very political. Not as much here. It's all about money consumerism most of the time. You know, enjoying things. But it's really refreshing to have this type of conversations.
Well, and likewise, because perhaps I feel the same outside of my, like my community. Well, it's easier with your own folks, right? To have these conversations, but it's so easy for me to get into this zone and we didn't talk too much about music.
That's okay. Like it's really all about what you want to talk about at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I mean, all of this stuff is super important to think about in terms of movement building, right? And like that's a lot of what music does. And in my early days, that's mainly what I supplied music for in a lot of ways. So would be rallies at the art gallery or different kind of protests and stuff like that, because that era that we're just talking about, created this bountiful kind of decade of music in the 70s, which is super political music, right? And probably the base or foundation of most of the music that you and I consume, digest, play, all of it. And so in a lot of ways what our conversation is, it actually is a direct relation to the music that we play. We just don't really think about music in that way. And even the stuff that's going on now will probably in years to come still reflect the same kind of vibration or same kind of idea, right? Like when you talk about Nipsey Hussle and folks like that, like in decades to come, they're going to signify this time that we're in, right? That is really hard and it's really heavy, and music is part of what gets us through that. So like they go hand in hand to me, absolutely. Sounds like it does for you too.
It's funny because like when hip-hop came out, there's this huge interest for the truth it was bringing. And I feel like now the connection with younger people with music, like they just like anything that is there's a lot of study around music and how it triggers your brain as well, right? So now they know how to make sound that makes money.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel
That's
like
true.
the world would definitely need some engaged hip hop right now.
Really do.
Like the way it was.
Just the other day, I don't know why, I was watching an interview with Lizzo, and she kind of got on like the label horn, and she was like, you know, Atlantic, we're running it. And I haven't looked at labels for a long time in terms of their rosters, so I kind of went down the wormhole and I was looking at that. And Atlantic, wow, so they must be connected to the writers that wrote all of ABBA's music, because ABBA's on their roster. And those folks are somewhat like 4 people that are from Norway, who have, you know, like at least a dozen monikers for each, and they literally write all of the popular music that we hear.
Okay.
Everything. They write everything. So the formula that you're talking about is actually from these 4 people who started writing music back in that era, in the ABBA era. And they're writing for Nicki Minaj, they're writing for Bruno Mars, they're writing for Taylor Swift, for I'm not really familiar with like other kind of like pop rock or anything like that, but you know, that's that method, that kind of frame of song that people recognize is a very small fraction of music patterns and styles. It's like really kind of being narrowed down to this very small, you know, very small, I don't know what the word I'm thinking of right now is. Coffee is sort of kicking in. But like small pool of music that you're able to kind of like formulate after. That's what popular music is. And I found it kind of re-disturbing after I'd learned that. I'd read this article, I think in like a public, like something like the New Yorker, and it was the first time I'd heard that these four men had basically been writing all the hit songs for decades. And when you think about it in that way, it's like such a monopoly, and it is almost like it's almost dishonest, right? Because it's like, why do they have 12 different names that they write under? Maybe that's fun, cool, but like also, if people knew that they're being fed kind of the same song by 4 people through different artists, maybe it wouldn't have such of an impact. So like there are manipulations that are kind of through that, and then when you look at, especially with hip-hop music, the way that it kind of came to be through commentary of you know, like a status quo space or positionality of peoples being oppressed. You know, the record labels absolutely have taken all of the information that they've been able to learn to kind of create this new form of, in my opinion, slavery of like keeping people down in some ways, because it's not necessarily our communities that are buying that music. It's white people. It's young white males between the ages of like 14 and 29 that buy the majority of like rap music. Really? Yeah.
Because it's funny, because I was talking to Corey, and he says like when he plays for old school hip hop, like most of the old school heads are actually like white guys. And he was saying like the younger like black generation is more interested into like the new stuff, more you know, not poppy, but like the new inside the underground hip hop,
right?
Basically the new stuff, not as much you know, the real origin of the culture, but more what it became now,
right? Which
is extremely entertainment oriented.
Very entertainment oriented, yeah.
And that is also one of the downside for me of this explosion of social media and content oriented mediums. It's just a boom of entertainment, and I find it's really correlated to the fact of the Western world, the Western lives is extremely stressful, and like the climate situation, you know, is extremely depressing. So you need to have all those content to have like this little smoke screen, because like you don't want to have more, and it's really weird, because if you look at the civil rights movement back in like all those artists were actually super engaged, like Nina Simone and all these people were engaged to try to like open people's eyes. There was a lot of conversation, but now everybody knows it's shit, so they need to move their mind away from it,
escape,
which is kind of like, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, I agree. Because perhaps for the first time, generationally, people actually do have the ability to escape, right? Before, maybe it was more in your backyard, it was more in your face, or maybe it's so much more now in your face that the only way to kind of deal with it is to escape.
Now turn left onto Caledonia Road.
So I do think that's really interesting, because there are some young folks that are more along the veins of kind of speaking the truth, right? But those would never be the ones that are on your major labels. But, you know, like folks like Swarvy, you know, out of the Bay, and like young cats like that. I think they're making really interesting music, and their formulas are very much kind of the classic era of hip-hop, in their own way. And the thing is they just don't catch that same kind of light, because that mainstream pathway is so in your face. Like, there's so much money putting to advertising, and just the way that like consumerist culture works is that you're just force-fed it. So it's hard to get away from. But I do think that there are pockets. They're harder to find, maybe, and I haven't done as much youth work in the past few years as I kind of grew up doing. But most recently this year, I've kind of been doing a little bit more DJ workshops and stuff like that. And of course, you're always going to get those young ones that are like, yeah, but do you have Cardi B on your laptop? I want to DJ Cardi B. And I'm like, that's not going to happen today. Like, here's a fly low track. Right. Try and see if you can play with that. Because they have been, you know, like brainwashed into, you know, hearing the same thing over and over and over again. That's what they want. I get that. But as long as there's people like us kind of fueling that other narrative, that other side of things, where it's like, I'm not going to necessarily censor the music when I'm playing with kids, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to say to them, like, hey, some of these songs have bad words in them. You've probably heard them all before. I'm not saying that you should go ahead and do that, but I'm not also censoring anyone. And when I approach young people that way, like, they're super cool with it. Teachers are usually cool with it, because it's like they hear that stuff all the time. They know it. And so just kind of being that straightforward with them is like an avenue for me to also be like, okay, well, I know that you get to hear that song all the time. How about you kind of like understand that I'm coming with a different kind of perspective, and that this is how I'm teaching you today. You can take what you're learning and you can apply it to whatever music that you want it. That's your thing. But in this space, when you're here with me, it's like respecting the fact that I'm taking this time and I'm giving you this knowledge, and that it comes with the music that I have, it comes with my playlist. And so kind of giving that perspective also then allows for young people to think, oh, there is other music out there that I don't get to hear. And then it does trigger some of them to be like, hey, where can I find that? Instead of being like, oh, you do have Wiz Khalifa on your computer, I'm gonna play this. Just going in and searching for all the music.
There's that aspect that is lacking from a lot of DJs, the educational part, which which was the origin of it. Like he wanted to, when you look at Kool Herc, when he was bringing the old James Brown music, that was basically, you know, prior the old disco era. There's this educational aspect that I thought was missing. You know, in Toronto, it's all about, you know, playing what people want to hear, which is kind of like counterproductive. Why do you want to go in this place to hear all the stuff that you already know? It's, you know, it's kind of like eating the same food every day. At some point you get tired of it. But yeah, what do you think about that? And also, yeah, I wanted to ask, how do you what do you think of the new generation of people who DJ, like, compared to the way you worked? What I hear a lot is that the newer generation want everything right away. Like, they don't want to make mistakes. They're afraid to make mistakes and learn from them. If it's not easy and they don't get it right away, they just quit.
Oh. I haven't seen that. So I haven't taught classes with vinyl. So there's
You have or you haven't?
I haven't.
Okay.
Not in the recent years. So anything that I've done is on Serato.
Okay.
Most recently. And young people know computers. You know, if I were to have done a DJ workshop when I first started, it would have been completely different. But you know, the last session I did, we did at the Urban Indigenous Education Center a day with Ernie Pancoli, and so there was some DJs teaching how to scratch, there was me who was teaching how to blend, beat making, b-girling, b-boying. We kind of covered all the elements, and we were in a grade school, so we'd like have groups that would just like kind of rotate around. And yeah, because young people know computers so easily, all I had to do was be like, okay, you understand tempo. You understand like how to count music, where like the structure is, right? You can pick out like what the snare is, you can pick out what a kick is, you can pick out. So I kind of taught them how to hear that music to begin with, and to how to hear the math in it. And then I showed them all the things that you can do on the turntable and the mixer and the computer. And then they just took it, and they were DJing by the end of the session. Like, they were actually good.
That's cool.
So my experience is that they pick it up so quickly that they're good at it and they just get bored with it. And so this is where what you're saying, the education piece, is really important, because what we're missing is the education around music.
Right.
We're missing the history. We're missing the intent of you know, that, you know, what was laid down here, right, in the Americas. So much of it comes from slave culture, it comes from the blues, it comes from jazz. It's infiltrated all of our music, all of like so-called American popular music. And I think part of the reason why, you know, North America has these issues that they're having is because they won't admit the past. And, you know,
Who's they though?
The governments,
Right.
yeah. Because us, the people, we're ready,
so
right?
a certain layer doesn't want to
Yeah.
admit it. Not everybody, because there's a lot of people admitting it, I think.
And doing something about it, perhaps, like actually taking steps towards not being white supremacist, essentially. Because that's what recognition would actually do, right? If you're realizing that history and trying to do something about it, then it would be a everybody at the table solution, which is what a lot of our communities are trying to do, right? That's what our peoples are trying to do. But in the Americas, because it is the epicenter of, you know, consumer culture and the way that the economy works, and, you know, most of the billionaires live on this continent. You know, so many of the 1%ers is the reason why. So like there's this huge divide is the reason why real education isn't there. And so, yeah, I feel like in terms of DJing and in terms of like teaching and kind of succession, passing the baton, it's really important that young people know the history of music, both from like an artistic perspective, from a people's perspective, but also from a political perspective, because that's what, you know, most of this music was born out of. And that it's not a bad thing to talk about. I think that it's really important to really reflect on that, because it's what brought us here, and we need to understand that in order to move ahead, right? So yeah, I think that maybe the young ones might just be so good at it they could get bored easily. That could be part of it. The ADD kind of like fast, quick cultures, maybe it's just not enough to retain some people. But I think also if that history was able to be understood, that then maybe another idea about what being a DJ is could resonate.
Well, so you were teaching them on controllers or on vinyls, on Serato with...
We were doing Serato and controllers. Yeah.
Okay, so no vinyls, no scratching, because that's another...
The other, like, so I was doing a controller, but the other DJs were doing scratching.
Right.
So, like, between all of us, they were getting everything.
Right, so, and they were actually good by the end of the session in scratching as well?
Some of them were really scratching well, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like to see the translation between... So I have this idea that if you take the spectrum between music and dance, there's a few disciplines that are kind of like in the middle.
Yeah.
I always say that DJing is like a mix between dance and music, but it's closer to music.
Yeah.
And then tap dance is you know, closer to dance, but you still make music with it.
Yeah.
And you definitely need to have a certain awareness of your body when you scratch. It helps definitely to know how to dance. And I find that it's very easy to do certain steps, to learn certain steps, but just understanding the concept of dancing. What's the difference between just you know, spinning some steps and actually dancing?
Yeah.
The abstraction of that is extremely hard, and that's what a lot of people abandon on, especially the younger people. They just want to impress, they just want to get their attention, but trying to reach that feeling of that you get when you actually dance, that's something a little more difficult to reach, and that they don't necessarily want to spend the time or the energy to get. And I find that it's really transferable to music. There is a difference between just playing some tracks and like understanding and reaching that zone that you have where you have this massive pleasure out of spinning that music, and then you just connect with the crowd with it.
Yeah.
That's completely two different worlds.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what some people in my line of work call the heart work, right? And to tie all of this together, perhaps, that's what consumerist culture divides us from, because if we're supposed to be workers, then we can't be working on our heart work or the things that we're like gifted to do, because we have to be inserted into the system. But if we actually have the ability to do the things that we were built for, that we desire to, that heart work, then, you know, like, our communities would be healthier. All of our communities would be healthier, because you'd have people that have that immense pleasure from doing the things that they were meant to do.
Yeah, and because the pleasure comes from within, not from the shit that you buy, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, on that good note, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really nice.
Yeah, it was really
Have you
good
on.
to have. I'm really thankful you asked me. Hopefully, we get to kick it again soon.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Let's do another gig soon. That'd be nice.
Let's do another gig soon.
Yeah.
That's possible. Anywhere. Let's do it.
Boom.
Peace.